I'm Diana Hammer, and I'm part of the leadership team for Resilient Helena. And so I'm so glad y'all could join us. And just a couple words about Resilient Helena before we get started. We formed the group in early 2019 to really recognize there are so many good things happening in Helena, and there's like all these different individuals and organizations involved in climate change or water conservation or habitat protection. And we wanted to kind of help connect some of those dots, raise awareness, really amplify and elevate the discussion around climate change and resiliency. And tonight's topic we wanted to bring forward early in the summer season, getting us thinking about what we can do either at a personal level or at a community level to prepare for and respond to wildfire. And I think all of us probably remember pretty well the fires of 2000, 2007, 2017, and the impacts that those had. In today's IR, there was an article that's predicting this 2020 fire season should be above average, and with all the predictions with climate change, we're expecting to have hotter, drier summers, less precipitation or less snowpack in the winter, leading to warmer rivers that impacts our fishery. You know, it's all connected. Then hotter summers with less precipitation. Sorry, my dog is kind of a loud water drinker. And those hotter, drier summers then stress our forests, which make the forest more susceptible to disease. We all probably remember the mountain pine bark beetle also. And then, of course, as they're more stressed, they're also more susceptible to wildfire. And then when wildfires do come, like, recently in 2017, have the impacts to public health with can look at the air quality chart, and Sealy Lake was in the purple zone for weeks. And we've got loss of wildlife habitat, with concerns about erosion, and of course the impacts. Part of our drinking water supply comes from 10 Mile, and so the forest fires and erosion can have impacts to our drinking water supply. And then of course there's loss of property, loss of tourism opportunities, and then potentially just we're so used to looking at our beautiful forests. Sorry, my dog doesn't know I'm on call. And potentially the loss of our views of forested mountainsides. So this is a really timely topic, and I want to thank both of our speakers tonight, Reese Martin with Lewis and Clark County Disaster Emergency Services, and Amy Teagarden, Program Manager with the Tri-County FireSafe Working Group. So the format is we'll have Reese start, speak for about 15 minutes. We'll take some questions, then we'll turn it over to Amy for about 15 minutes, take more questions, and then about her presentation, and then open it up to a wider discussion. All right, did I miss anything? Okay, well with that, we'll turn it over to Reese Martin. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Reese Martin. I'm the Lewis and Clark County Disaster Emergency Services Coordinator. I do not recall a lot of the fire years that you spoke of. I moved here 2 years ago from Texas. So I can only tell you from what the county perspective is with regards to how we're looking forward with regards to wildland fires and addressing those and addressing those. And I'll let Amy speak to the mitigation efforts, since she is heading up one of the larger projects that we've gotten here recently. But there's a lot of factors that come into play when you're talking about wildland fire issues. The climate change, of course, is one. But if you also look at the historical context of wildland areas where there was a forested area, there was a shift in how these areas were managed decades ago, where that it was often that they would burn off or clear out a lot of these forests to make them healthier and to cut down on this this risk of wildland fires. That changed for some reason, and a new perspective was taken on how they were going to manage wildland areas. And unfortunately, they didn't take into account that these forested areas are subject to disease, and of course, the greatest in this area was the beetle kill that occurred several years ago, where a lot of the standing trees were either killed off or had fallen onto the ground, creating a lot of fuel for wildland fires. And when I took this position 2 years ago, there were population protection plans in place for a lot of the areas of the county that detailed evacuation routes, safe zones, and things of that nature. And they always had the South Hills plan for the city of Helena, which mainly focused on the South Hills area of Helena, where Unionville and the other areas can greatly impact Helena with a wildland fire that could move north. And that was last updated in 2011. And what happens with this is when you ask the question, is Helena another Paradise, California? That could, it's potentially, it can be. There have been a lot of things that have not been done to build the community's resilience to wildland fire. Again, the mitigation efforts have not been as aggressive as needed. Amy can speak to that, but other issues like, again, fire-wise community. Helena is currently not a fire-wise community. And basically all that is that the community is aware that they're in the wildland urban interface. They're aware that, even though they reside in an urban area, they are subject to a wildland fire event. And they take steps to ensure mitigation in this area. But again, going back to the South Hills plan in 2011, when I took this position, the actual city of Helena did not have a population protection plan. There were no evacuation routes identified. There was no staging areas identified. No refuge areas. And a refuge area would be the last place you would want to go if you're surrounded by fire. People needed to go where they could go, where they could be the safest inside of a wildland fire event. So these all needed to be identified, and both Chief Wood with the Helena Fire and Chief Hagan with the Helena Police Department helped me develop the plan. It is currently on the county website. It details the evacuation routes for the city of Helena, and it also identifies the refuge areas, mainly in the south side of Helena, where we predict is going to be mostly affected by a wildland fire in the south end of Helena. The issue is that there's still a long ways to go. If you look at the population protection plan maps and you see the evacuation routes, people are still allowed to park on the curb on these routes, narrowing the roadways. There are bushes and other trees that need to be mitigated to ensure that they do not catch fire because of an ember that's thrown ahead and block the evacuation route for people trying to leave the area. So there are still a lot of work to be done with regards to ensuring that these evacuation routes are still are as wide and as mitigated as possible to allow people to egress quickly from the area. The other issues with the population protection plan is that the large park in Helena, where you have a lot of people that hike and hike around the mountainsides and things of that nature, the trails are not marked for those to basically provide hikers with information that this is the quickest route out of here. For example, someone like and we have to get away from the assumption that people who are hiking on Mount Helena or in these massive park on the south side of Helena are from Helena. I've lived in Helena for 2 years, and I can hike up to the top of Mount Helena, and I couldn't tell you what trail would get me out of there quickest. I'd probably get on a trail and end up right in the fire. And that's some things that need to be done to address that. People need to understand how we're going to, they need to get the fastest way out to hike out of there to avoid a wildland fire incident. Other things that need to be worked on, of course, is, evacuation routes as well as shelters. There's always been an assumption that, a wildland fire could be stopped at Euclid Avenue. And thinking as an emergency manager, I always pose the question, what if? What if a fire reaches up to Euclid Avenue and a 50-mile-an-hour gust decides to blow through and blows it past this point? So what has to be considered as well is, where do we evacuate the residents of Helena to for a wildland fire event? And, to be honest with you, I've discussed it with the Red Cross, and people need to be made aware that there's nowhere in Helena itself that is going to be a good site for a shelter or to try to set up because of the smoke inundation. The plans that I'm working on with the Red Cross is to go as far north as possible, as far east, west, to get people out of the city until the smoke clears. A wildland fire on the south side of Helena could create enough smoke to choke out plenty of folk. And so these are, from the county perspective, these are the things that we're looking at on how we can best protect people and get them somewhere where they're safe. The biggest problem Helena has is that makes them a paradise waiting to happen is on the south side of Helena is our healthcare facilities, our I call them nursing homes. It may not be politically correct, but the homes where all our elderly folks are, as well as over half of our child care facilities, daycares. So this is something that we've been working on a great amount on, trying to make sure that these people have plans in place to take care of these individuals. Some facilities have great plans in place, some I'm not sure. And what happened is the state of Montana, well, the federal government after Hurricane Katrina required nursing homes to have emergency operations plans. The state of Montana codified it in their state law. The problem is they failed to take it a step further and say, you need to share your plans with the local DES coordinator. So they're not required, they're required to have this emergency operations plan, but I don't know what their plan is. And so they're not, and then of course they're not required to provide that to me. But it'd be nice to have that information. That way we can at least network and communicate during an event. So I liken it to checking on some, I liken it to just wasting time. I don't need firefighters and police and those volunteers checking on a nursing home that's already empty. We're wasting time. We need to make sure that we're taking care of those that are in the area still. So it'd be nice if we had some kind of communication between each other, that I knew that they executed their plan and that building was either empty or they were secure and safe. Other issues range to latchkey children who are at home, by themselves on some, after school and during the summer and whatnot, because both parents work, but they're old enough to stay by themselves. I've spoken to several people who have latchkey children, and I've asked them, do they know where to go? Do they have a neighbor they can go to get them out of the area? Do they know where to meet you at? It'd be amazing. A lot of these people do not have simple plans such as that. And lastly, I would say, the go kits, FEMA always tells individuals to have enough supplies and things for 3 days. I would stress that if you're going to have things in a go bag, have 7 to 10 days worth of what you need, especially medication. 7 to 10 days of any medication you're required to take is a must, because it's going to take time to get medication to you. It's going to take time to coordinate with a pharmacist to have that ability. And of course, lastly, the last two things, I know I'm probably running close on time, but the last two things is one, pets. You would not you would not know the number of people in the North Hills fire event that did not want to evacuate because they had pets. Please make prior arrangements for your pets. Most shelters will not take them, but make arrangements with family or friends that would not normally live in that area and be subject to this type of wildland fire threat, so you could have them take care of your pets. And the second last thing, of course, is evacuations. If you have a camper, bring it. If you have a mobile home, bring it. If you have family you can go stay with, do that, because under this COVID-19 pandemic event, shelters are going to look a lot different, and they're going to be a lot leaner with regards to substance because of this illness that can be transmitted through these facilities. And I think I spoke fast enough and quick enough. So anybody have any questions? Oh, wow, that's good. I'm really smart. I know that I'm good when I can have no questions.
Well, I have a question, Reese.
Yeah.
This is Milton. I went to the county site and I was looking at some of the maps. They're interesting. I hadn't realized they were there. And, you know, the way things are with people being so busy, it seems that, do you guys have a plan for some kind of like regular 2-3 times a year, kind of letting people know to go look at that stuff? I think a lot of people maybe don't know that you've done that work.
Yes, sir. We have what we call preparedness fairs several times a year, and we remind people about that. And, you know, once again, because of the COVID issue, I've been a little busy, but I normally do try to go on social media. I do have a Facebook page for the Emergency Management Division for the county, and just remind folks, hey, look on the website, know your evacuation route, you know how you can get out of the area. My biggest concern, again, with evacuation routes, sir, is the fact that, you know, I'm not saying it's the city's, it's nobody's fault, okay? It's just these evacuation routes, when they're identified, there's a lot of work needs to be done with them. You cannot have people parking on the side of the road of these. We just can't have people trapped on an evacuation route like in Paradise and dying in their car from smoke inhalation. And you know, I know that this is something that is going to aggravate a lot of people in Helena because they like their curbside parking here. But these routes, they need to be open. They need, during the summer especially, you know, this parking on the side of these designated emergency routes is basically the same thing as an emergency snow route. They need to move. It just can't happen. You know, they need to be mitigated. People cannot park along the side because we don't want people trapped. And then on top of that, folks are going to have to realize that some of these beautiful trees and some of these wooden signs and nice, you know, historic kind of, you know, eclectic kind of routes with, you know, they only create hazards. You know, if we have 1 or 2 trees burn and fall across of an evacuation route, it could be dangerous for everyone. So those are the considerations for the evacuation routes that I stress.
I have a question, Reese. You mentioned the South Hills. What if, you know, a few years ago there was a fire on Mac Pass that seemed to raise a lot of concerns about it coming down, burning through Colorado Gulch, and then coming into Helena from the west. How much of a concern is that for wildfire?
Right. Well, that is just as much as a concern as the South Hills. If you look at a map of Helena, if a fire comes roaring in from the west, then it could potentially not only roar into the west and hit the South Hills and move north and things of that nature. All of that's a concern. And so the evacuation routes have been written for all of those. You know, it's just the biggest concern is that if you speak to most people, they're comfortable with the idea or the thought that they could go to their son's house on the north side of Helena or their cousin's house on the north side of Helena. And we got to think larger than that. You know, if this fire is large enough, then the entire city of Helena is going to be inundated with smoke. And it's just not a plan that needs to be in. Their mindset needs to think larger. I think folks need to think bigger of, I'm not going to just go to my son's house in the valley, and I'm not going to go to my nephew's house here. because the smoke inundation is probably going to force them to go elsewhere as well. So that's what people need to think. But the west side of Helena is just as bad. And I think that the bigger concern for the South Hills area is only because of all the medical facilities and all of the nursing homes and daycares that have packed up around St. Pete's Hospital. That, you know, is that's what makes it a little bit more of a concern. I'm not saying that we're not concerned about the people that live on the west side of Helena. It's just, you know, these facilities tend to make it very, very difficult for the local governments. You know, when Santa Rosa, California caught fire, they had a hospital they had to evacuate, and it took an entire incident command level 3 staff to get them evacuated. And we don't have those kind of resources here. You know, California has a lot of people that can come and create these teams and form these teams and get things done, while Montana doesn't really have those kind of resources. So that's the big concern, is how are we going to, on the South Hills, is that, you know, these homes and things is what is a big concern, is because, you know, it's very difficult to get these folks out of there when we need to.
No, thank you. Are there any other questions?
Well, at least you know, y'all understood the redneck twang just fine, huh?
Well, thank you, Reese. You know, if anyone thinks of questions, we'll have time at the end for more discussion. Now we'll turn it over to Amy Teagarden. She's a program manager for FireSafe Helena, and working with the Tri-County FireSafe Group. Amy?
Thanks, Diana. I don't believe that's the first screen. Is that the number 1 slide? Is that the first slide? I don't think so. Unless I sent you an old version, I may have done that.
It is the first slide, and then the next
Okay.
Colorado Helena area.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to visit with you folks today. As Diana mentioned, I'm working for Tri-County FireSafe Working Group. This is a nonprofit organization that was established as a result of the North Hills fire in 1984 to do some fire prevention education. And over the course of those 36 years, their mission has evolved, the organization has evolved, and a big focus is doing mitigation on forested private land in the Tri-County area of Jefferson County, Broadwater, and Lewis and Clark County. This spring, the organization working with Lewis and Clark County was awarded a grant from FEMA for a very specific project in South Central Helena. Working with a focus group, we'll wait for just a sec. Working with a focus group earlier this spring, the name of the program or the project has been coined FireSafe Helena, making Helena a wildfire adapted community. And we have developed a vision statement. That vision statement is Helena is a community connected by neighborhoods that seeks to be informed and take action to safely coexist with wildfire in our urban setting. And as this current slide shows, becoming a fire adapted community, there's a lot of facets. It's community engagement, it's planning, it's preparation, it's doing community mitigation work on homes, on properties, on evacuation routes, all of those types of things. The partners of FireSafe Helena include Lewis and Clark County, the City of Helena Fire Department, Tri-County FireSafe Working Group, as well as the key partners will be those community residents, businesses, and community partners. We can go to the next slide. Just a quick question for you. Do you think that these photos are from Colorado or the Helena area? These are photos that were taken last summer. They were not in Colorado. They were not from California. This was from the North Hills fire that we had in July 2019. We go to the next one. Once again, do you think that these are photos from California or the Helena area? These are photos that were taken in 2017 from the Holmes Gulch fire just south of the city boundary in Jefferson County. Next. I apologize. I did updated this presentation, and unfortunately I don't think I sent the right one, but I do have a slide that shows the project area. Going back to FireSafe Helena, the project area is bordered by Broadway Avenue to the north, Davis Gulch to the west, Interstate 15 to the east, and the city boundary to the south up on the South Hills Drive. So nationally, we're learning how to live with and adapt to wildfire. In 2014, there was a national wildfire management cohesive strategy that identified how to extinguish fire, where to use fire, and how to also live with wildland fire, which in my word is how to mitigate and reduce those risks. If we go to the next slide. And I don't know, is there a way that I can do the slide myself? Maybe not.
I lost it all. Sorry, let me go back to the screen share. We can try and make you the host.
That's okay if you don't mind me just saying next. I'll just do that. But the reason I'm showing you this strategy is because this is also being applied to Helena. So the National Wildland Fire Strategy, Cohesive Strategy, had 3 areas of emphasis. That is to restore and maintain resilient landscapes, work with communities to become fire adapted, and then also have response and recovery plans in place, much of like what Reese just spoke about. And all of that is supported by fire sciences and community science as well. Next. So if you look at this, that strategy, I look at it as kind of a donut. If you look at restoring and maintaining landscapes, that's the bigger donut, the bigger circle. That's our public lands, our national forests, our city open lands, our Bureau of Land Management lands. You come in a little bit closer, that's the wildland urban interface, or the intermix. That's our Mount Helena, our Mount Ascension, Helena's open lands. Also those bigger acreages adjacent to public lands. And then you come a little bit closer into the bullseye, and that is the creating a fire adapted community, or that could be Helena or Montana City or any other community in a WUI area of Montana. Next. So I think a lot of people understand what the wildland urban interface here is on our call. If you look at real quick at where Lewis and Clark County is on this map, the dark red are those higher at-risk areas in the wildland urban interface. Next. This is Lewis and Clark County. I think everyone can point to where Helena is. We are definitely a hot spot as it in respect to wildfire danger in the wildland urban interface. Next. So Reese also talked about the Tri-County Regional Community Wildfire Protection Plan. The CWPP, as we refer to it, has a lot of different recommendations and program ideas. FireSafe Helena is a project that will actually implement the recommendations in the CWPP for this project area. And that will include home hardening, creating defensible space, and hazardous fuel removal along evacuation routes. Next. So basically what I want to just emphasize here, why do work ahead of time? Because for every dollar spent on mitigation costs, that's $4 saved in suppression costs. So the safest and cheapest fire is the one that we prevent. Next. Once again, going back to that, the National Cohesive Strategy and looking at the donuts, there's actually projects underway that mimic that strategy. So working with the City of Helena, the Forest Service, the BLM, there's the Capital 360 project, which is doing hazardous fuel treatment in a 360-degree area of Helena, using Helena as the center point. And those are priority projects for our federal partners. Looking at the intermix region or donut, that's what the City of Helena has been doing since 2008 on hazardous fuel reduction, which has become a great success. And now many of those projects that were done in 2008, 9, and 10 are actually going back in for maintenance now or being finished up. And then once again, FireSafe Helena is at the center of that. And then working with the Helena Fire Department to with their population protection plan. That's the response and recovery part of this cohesive strategy. So that's how we're applying the cohesive strategy locally. Next. Next. So once again, I talked about the project area. Unfortunately, this isn't the updated presentation, but one of the first things that we did was confirm the number of wood shake roofs in the project area. When we started out, well, there's a total of 2,000, almost 2,700 properties in the project area. Reese talked about the high number of critical care facilities. And at the time we started this project, we were under the assumption that there was nearly 200 structures with wood shake roofs. As we've done some verification, that number is actually around 50. So a lot of people have already changed out their wood shake roofs to asphalt or metal. So that was a good thing that we found out. Next. So some of the risk factors of why we're even talking about this, it's the forest health, it's part of that climate change, it's the fire suppression, not allowing the natural processes to take place, the fuel loading, the forest health on Mac Pass, south of Helena, all those areas, that is the risk. These conditions pose a very real danger to our city. Next. Fire behavior. Reese talked about some of the fire modeling that has happened. Fire modeling on a day in August using real weather criteria. We have the ability for a wind-driven fire to likely cause rapid evacuation in our community. And what I like to talk about here is that you don't have to live in a forest to be in a wildfire. What will happen to Helena isn't necessarily the flame front coming, it's the ember showers coming into our community and the spot fires. And that also then leads into homes becoming the ignition and causing other fires because of that. And that's what we saw in Paradise. Next. The home ignition zone. That's what we're talking about. It's that ember shower coming into contact with highly flammable constructions such as wood roofs, wood siding, vegetation that grows right adjacent to structures. That's how we're going to have the fire spread in the city of Helena. And that's going to be fast, and that's going to go from home to home. Next. These are Ember ignition points. One of the goals of FireSafe Helena is there's a lot of things you can do to reduce your risks that don't cost a lot of money. That is simple mitigation, spring cleanup days, removing debris from your gutters, from the eaves, putting vents on your attic openings, putting screens underneath your decks, all of that to make sure that ignition points are not vulnerable to ember showers. Next. The other risks that we face in the project area as well as throughout the area is the inadequate defensible space. That is vegetation growing adjacent to homes and decks, which can easily ignite. As I drive through the project area, and I challenge all of you the next time you're in that area, take a look at all the vegetation. And what I find very interesting is that my risk may not even be on my property. It could be on my neighbor's property. So that's something that a goal of this program is to work with groups of neighbors to do neighborhood scale defensible space. Another term that I've developed as I've been driving around is that people have trophy trees. Beautiful trees that are growing up through their decks and overhanging their trees. And I think that's going to be a tough one to sell, but we're going to have to really work together to influence people that some of that vegetation is actually a risk to their home or to their neighbor's home. Next. This diagram just shows the home-to-home ignition concept. And if you look at this photo, you can see that some of the trees that the homes have burnt, the trees are standing, and it was the homes that actually were the fuel for the spread of this fire. It becomes like a chain reaction. And that demonstrates also the need for FireSafe Helena to work at a neighborhood approach, neighbor to neighbor, neighborhood by neighborhood. Next. One of the things that becomes so complex about this project area is the mixed use that we have. Number of residential, a high number of rental properties, commercial, critical care facilities, and also critical city infrastructure, such as water tanks. Next. Reese talked about evacuation routes. This project will also focus on taking those evacuation routes that the city of Helena identified, doing a risk assessment of those evacuation routes, doing mitigation along those evacuation routes so that they remain as safe as they can be. We will do some fire behavior modeling. What happens if the fire comes from this direction, jumps the line, those types of things. We've also put in for another FEMA grant to look at all the evacuation routes in the 3-county area and do a risk assessment and then do mitigation projects as well. Next.
Amy, it's about 2 minutes.
Okay, thanks. So essentially wrapping up, FireSafe Helena will be a 2-phased approach. We're doing a lot of outreach and engagement. That approach has changed due to COVID. We were going to do a lot of neighborhood events, community events. We are now doing more of a radio campaign. In fact, the radio ads are out this week. We're going to defer our risk assessments to later this fall. Instead, we're focusing on those houses that have wood shake roofs that we've confirmed. We'll be outreaching to them and their adjacent neighbors to do some home hardening and defensible space work. And then, like I said, the evacuation routes. Next. We can skip that. This is just an example of what defensible space is. There's a lot of good websites, and we'll be doing more education on this. Next. Here's an example of a home that has great defensible space. It would survive. Next. This is a home in the project area. I hope it's not any one of your homes. I drove by this again today and multiplied this by about 100, and that's what we're dealing with in the project area. Next. And this is just one of our projects along doing work along evacuation routes. Next. We will definitely have a emphasis on celebrating success. And it's my hope that FireSafe Helena in this project area can just be duplicated in other parts of Helena as we continue down this road. Next. It will be a continuum. Next. One of the things to point out is that as we do assessments, this is a two-phase approach. As I told you, phase one has been for funding for a lot of the outreach and the planning. Before we implement mitigation efforts in phase two, we will have to go back to FEMA. We will have to do an environmental and historic analysis, but that's all written into the project approach. So truly mitigation on a neighborhood scale won't begin until 2021. And then I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Great. Thank you, Amy.
You're welcome.
Now that we're all nervous, anybody have any questions?
You know, it's not to make people nervous. I think there's a fine line between being realistic and also, I don't want to say it, but I will, lighting a fire, getting people's attention. You know, it is going to take a community approach to reduce our risks.
That was a good pun.
Thank you. I've been working alone a lot lately, so.
Hello, this is Patrick Judge, and wanted to thank Resilient Helena and our speakers. Had a question about, I've been rereading the 2009 Climate Action Plan, and one of the recommendations for the city was to implement the recommendations of the 10-mile watershed coordinating committee. So thinking about that critical city infrastructure and the 10-mile treatment plant and our water supply. I was just wondering if you had a sense for kind of where that stands. I know there's been fuel reductions projects and whatnot up in that area, the Remini area, but could you give me some more specifics on that?
I'm not as up to date as I used to be. I know that there's been an ongoing mitigation on city-owned property up in the 10-mile. First, we focused on the oh shoot, the name escapes me. What delivers the flume, the wooden section of the flumes, and working with the private landowners that the flume crossed, as well as doing mitigation around Scott Reservoir and Chessman. My understanding is that the Forest Service proposal for the 10-mile work in the roadless area is being challenged, but they're laying out the projects and are allowed to be moving forward with those projects outside the roadless area. But that's just what I can kind of recall. I would recommend you contact Kathy Bushnell. She's the new Helena District Ranger and the former Public Affairs Officer for the Helena, Lewis and Clark.
Great, thank you.
And then also a good resource for you, Patrick, would be Brad Langsather, the Helena Open Lands Manager. He can give you a really good overview of what the city has done. And I know he's up to speed on where the Forest Service position is.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think he's actually staffing that committee. I think they're continuing to meet. So great,
Yeah.
thanks.
Uh-huh.
I've got a couple questions, I guess, about communication avenues. We've heard of reverse 911, and we wonder how you sign up for that. And also, Nextdoor appears to be something that's becoming pretty useful for getting word out. And I wondered if that's an avenue that's being used.
Is that directed? I would defer that to Reese, I think.
Yeah, Lewis and Clark County uses the Smart 911 system, and you can register on the smart911.com. There's also a link provided on the county webpage with regards to how you can sign up for Smart 911 that allows you to access it fairly quickly. The Smart 911 system is used, there's two systems that are used, both the RAVE and the Smart 911. The RAVE system does a blanket county-wide notification. It's on cell phone or on landline. The problem is that, if you live in Helena, you're not really too concerned about, Augusta's, Elk Creek is flooding into Augusta, because you don't want to get that in the middle of the night and wake you up. It tends to aggravate folks. So the Smart 911 system allows for RAVE to do targeted notifications for specific areas of the county. You put your name, your address, things of that nature. Smart 911 also allows you to place a lot of information in there that some folks don't care to, like the kind of vehicles they have, how many vehicles are at the home, what kind they are, and things of that nature. And basically it says that, it allows for law enforcement, if they go by and they see both vehicles there, then they assume you're home. But if one's gone, then they can knock on the door. If you don't answer, they can assume you're gone. It also allows you to put in like health information, that if you have any special needs with regards to any health issues or anything. Most folks don't care to do that, but just basically their name, address, and phone number, and a cell phone number is good, because it allows you to be targeted, notified for things that happen within your community or what's affecting you directly, your community directly. Lewis and Clark County did recently hire a communications and outreach director. She has a very long title that I never remember, but I call her a public information officer. Her name is Jennifer Garson, and she has signed up the county on the Nextdoor app. And she's put a lot of information out on the Nextdoor app about things. She also created a Lewis and Clark County blog. I think that's what that's called, a blog, where they share stories about what the county's doing. And she's also created a Twitter account for the county as well to reach out to people during these emergencies and disasters. But however, the main ones that the main sources we're going to use in Lewis and Clark County is, of course, the reverse 911 for immediate transmissions, social media such as Facebook, Lewis and Clark County Disaster Mercy Services has a Facebook page that we post a lot of information on. And Jenny really wanted to try to get into using Twitter due to our college population here in Helena. I believe a lot of the kids still use that instead of Facebook. I heard I think, you know, a lot of, my daughter told me that Facebook's for old people now, so I don't know. But we're going to reach out to people in all these fashions, but you know, unfortunately, with the Smart 911 system, we have about 64,000 residents in Lewis and Clark County, and we're probably at about 6% have actually signed up for the program. And despite our efforts to get folks to sign up, despite our efforts to every preparedness fair, we have how to sign up for the system, what the system offers. We have a very poor showing from our community with regards to this signing up for this program, unfortunately.
Reese, this is Max Milton on that. I just went and looked at that blog. You know, I've been kind of following the county planning process, and as much as the county tries, it's been a persistent problem to get, you know, people following what's going on. It's just not a habit people have. So I don't know what the answer to that is, but I know that a lot of people just aren't paying attention. So it may take, you know, many attempts in the newspaper. Not, you know, a lot of people aren't even reading the newspaper anymore. So it's hard to know. I guess you have to do it all, you know, radio, social media, TV. Have you guys done stuff on the Helena Civic TV?
Yes, sir. We've done things on Helena Civic TV. Unfortunately, you know, to be frank, most of the time, that most of what happens when folks really start paying attention and when they start signing up for these programs and doing these things is when something bad happens.
Right. Yeah,
and we want to try to avoid that, but it's been my experience that that's when people do is they'll sign up, they'll get concerned about, you know, emergency management, having a plan and all this stuff after something bad happens. And unfortunately, it's going to cost people, maybe possibly cost lives, and maybe possibly cost some hard lessons for some. I would prefer the hard lessons.
Reese, we have a question from Robert Rasmussen asking how wide the emergency routes and evacuation routes are supposed to be in an ideal world, and also what's on the ground now.
You know, for coming from somebody that's had to evacuate populations for a hurricane, you know, you want one roadway to be at least able to handle the width of 2 vehicles. But for this area, because a lot of folks here have recreational vehicles and trailers, you want to have a roadway that's wide enough to handle vehicles and those trailers. The ideal world would be that you would have road evacuation routes wide enough that if somebody broke down or something happened, they could be shoved off to the side and people could get around them. And on top of that, allow emergency vehicles to move into the area as people evacuate. That's ideal. So you're probably looking at the ideal scenario would be a roadway wide enough for 2 vehicles towing a trailer or 2 recreational vehicles, enough area to shove somebody off to the side if they break down or something, to get them out of the way, and another lane for emergency vehicles to make their way into the fire area. But we don't have that here. In Helena, we got roadways that are wide enough for 2 vehicles if we can eliminate people parking on the curb. I drove some of these evacuation routes, and just vehicles parked along the curb just made me cringe. It's just a nightmare just waiting to happen.
If I could jump in real quick. Something that I've learned that some communities are doing on days that are declared red flag days, so that's high temperatures, predicted high winds, low humidity, much like on your snow evacuation routes, they do not allow parking along the side of those evacuation routes on a red flag day. And so that's maybe something that our community may want to consider for some policy development, is just, you know, and it comes with training people. Oh, it's a red flag day, we can't park there.
Are there,
But that,
I'm sorry.
mhm.
Are there, Amy or Reeds, are there other management policies that would be helpful for the city or the county to implement? And maybe we can help spread awareness on those things.
I think the other end of that is like Amy said, you know, this is going to be a hard road to hoe with a lot of folks, because, you know, if you live along an evacuation route and you have that beautiful tree or that beautiful wooden signpost or wooden billboard that, you know, is subject to a fire and things like that that have to be mitigated in some way. And I'm not saying chop it down all the way and just be done with it, but some folks tend to think that mitigation means clear cutting, especially along an evacuation route, which isn't necessarily so. But, you know, educating people on what that mitigation looks like and just letting them know that this is for the best of the community as a whole. If, you know, I think people love the idea of having their wooden fences, their big trees in front of their homes and things, but if it costs somebody their lives, I mean, or a problem during an evacuation, I just feel like that's something they need to be made aware of. I'm not necessarily, I don't know if the city of Helena is ready to take on that challenge of actually having regulation and rules to put down on people. But I think that if we could do an education campaign for people about this and say, don't be so resistant to this. We're not saying we're going to clear cut that tree that's been in front of your house for decades. We just want to mitigate it to some degree that we can ensure people can evacuate. I think that that's what the better route.
Some of my research and reaching out to other communities that have a very robust mitigation program is they actually have assessments in their community, so a special tax that actually helps fund a mitigation program within the fire department and works with homeowners to do mitigation, or is used as leverage to other types of grants. I'm not suggesting that, and I think, you know, where we're at with COVID right now, that would be a hard sell. But if you do look at other communities with very successful mitigation programs, they do have special funding for those people that they have designated living in the wildland urban interface, so a special district or area. There's also building codes, there's subdivision regulations, those types of things. But that's beyond my pay level right now. You know, but that's working with the city county planning board, those types of things. You know, where do we allow development or those types of things. But some of that's kind of water under the bridge too, because I think we have to take care of the situation that we have right now as well as future planning. Yeah, I lost my train of thought there as far as some policies and things. You know, I know the city has a nuisance vegetation ordinance. I helped write part of that, and that's a way to deal with vegetation that obstructs views like an intersection, but it also is for vegetation that may cause the fire nuisance. But I'm not so sure that could deal with defensible space, but I might want to research that a little bit as well. Or if my neighbor's dense vegetation is hanging over my deck, could that be considered nuisance vegetation to me, because that's a risk for me. I'm not sure about that. It's something we could talk to the city attorney about. But hopefully we can create a sense of community, neighborhood desire to make their homes and their neighborhood more resistant to, or to better able to survive a wildfire. We're never going to prevent the wildfires, and that's a message that we want to get out. It's so that your home can withstand a wildfire. Another misperception I think that people may have is that, oh, if we get a wildfire, city fire department, Forest Service, they'll take care of it for us. That's not, we don't have enough capacity to deal with the type of challenges that we're going to have. And those homes that have done pre-mitigation ahead of time, those are the homes that they're going to spend their resources on. The ones that make it safer for the firefighters to put out. Those will be some of our messages. So what you do now will only help the firefighters in the event of a fire when it comes, so that they're more likely to save your home, or that they won't need to because you've done enough work ahead of time.
Well, good. Well, thank you, Amy, and Reese. It's, you know, Mark is nudging that it's 8 o'clock. Are there any last questions? The presentations were really super informative. I learned a lot. I know. Anyone have any questions before we wrap up?
And just one thing to add, we did record this session and we'll post it on the Resilient Helena website. So, or if you missed something that someone said, that will all be available.
I guess I will just add that we're in a little bit of limbo due to COVID. We were really ready to just run out of the gate with all these different community events, doing risk assessments on site, doing all of this, and that kind of burst our bubble a little bit. We're having to restrain ourselves, and so we're missing some program information about how some of this is really going to be rolled out. So we're kind of just idling right now, and really, like I said, focusing in on those homes that we confirmed have wood shake roofs and trying to work with them directly. So we're not doing a bunch of public outreach for people to sign up to have a risk assessment done. Instead, we're just doing more of those mitigation messages in general. And then we'll work directly with those homeowners and other folks that we feel that are at higher risk than others. So kind of quiet right now.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks again, Amy and Reese, and wish everybody a good evening. And we'll, I guess, just to wrap up, the next Resilient Helena meeting won't be until September. So
okay,
hopefully we'll be at the end of a very non-eventful fire season.
And I would love to use you guys as a resource for for this program. And so I'll continue to reach out to you, Diana.
Okay, that'd be awesome, Amy.
All right, thanks.
All right, thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.